The air was thick with incense and whispers, the dim light of the ancient temple casting long shadows on its intricately carved walls. In the center of the hall, an elder knelt before a worn manuscript, its edges frayed and stained by centuries of hands that had reverently turned its pages. This was no ordinary book. Its words were said to hold the essence of an entire civilization, its wisdom, its fears, its hopes for the unknown. The Book of Parables was more than a collection of teachings, it was a living heartbeat of a forgotten world. It had been written in a time when the earth trembled beneath the weight of warring gods, and the skies were alive with signs and omens. The people who created it believed that their lives were threads in a grand, celestial tapestry. To them, every moment, every choice, was a story woven into eternity. The society that gave birth to the Book of Parables thrived in the shadow of towering mountains, where snow-capped peaks scraped the heavens. They called themselves the Keepers of the Voice, a name that carried the weight of their sacred duty. For generations, they had passed down tales whispered to them in dreams or carved into stone by those who claimed to hear the voice of the divine. Their lands were wild, untamed, and beautiful, a reflection of the chaos and wonder of existence itself. Life in this ancient society was not easy. Harsh winters claimed many lives, and summer's fleeting warmth felt like a gift from unseen hands. Yet, amid their struggles, the keepers found meaning in the stories they told. These stories were not merely entertainment, they were guides, maps to navigate the unseen world of spirit and destiny. The elders often said that without stories, the people would be like stars ripped from the sky, bright but lost in the void. The origins of the Book of Parables are steeped in mystery, as though its pages have always existed, waiting for someone to give them form. It is said that the book began with a single dream, shared by many. On a night when the moon glowed red and the air buzzed with an unearthly hum, the first keeper saw a vision of a great river, its waters shimmering with light. Floating on its surface were fragments of stories, like scattered petals. A voice told him to gather these fragments and bind them together, for they would guide his people through trials yet to come. The keeper awoke trembling, his heart pounding with the weight of what he had seen. He shared his vision with the elders, who recognized the urgency in his words. Together, they began the sacred task of recording the parables, each word chosen with care, as if it were a seed that would one day bloom in the minds of those who read it. The numbers 37 to 44 hold a significance that even the wisest of the keepers struggled to explain fully. Some believe these numbers represented the steps of a great staircase, each step a lesson that led closer to understanding the divine. Others whispered that they were the years it took to complete the book, though no one could agree on when it had truly begun. The numbers seemed to hum with a life of their own, their meanings shifting like shadows at dusk. One tale speaks of a child who wandered into the temple and placed their hand on the manuscript. The child, barely old enough to speak, pointed to the numbers and said, "These are the voices of the stars." The elders were stunned, for they had long thought the same but never dared to say it aloud. From that moment, the numbers were revered as a bridge between the mortal and the eternal. The stories within chapters 37 to 44 were said to be the heart of the book, their wisdom sharper than a blade and softer than a lullaby. These chapters spoke of a world balanced on the edge of light and shadow, where every choice could tip the scales. They told of a shepherd who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, a mountain that whispered secrets to those brave enough to climb it, and a river that revealed the truth to those willing to face its depths. The keepers believed that these chapters held the keys to understanding the nature of existence. They taught that life was not a straight path, but a series of crossings, each one asking something of us, our courage, our love, our patience. To read these chapters was to feel the pull of something greater than oneself, a force that was both terrifying and beautiful. Generations later, the Book of Parables remains an enigma. Scholars argue over its origins, its meanings, and its purpose, but those who have truly felt its power know that it cannot be confined to words alone. The keepers called it a gift from the heavens, but perhaps it is something even more profound, a mirror held up to humanity, reflecting both our light and our darkness. The ink on its pages may have faded, but the stories remain, etched into the hearts of those who hear them. And the numbers, 37 to 44, continue to whisper their secrets, waiting for those brave enough to listen. The night was silent except for the soft crackle of a fire in the temple's courtyard. Shadows danced on the stone walls, their flickering shapes resembling figures caught in a timeless ritual. In the heart of the temple, figures in long robes moved deliberately, their faces hidden beneath veils of fabric embroidered with constellations. These were the scribes of the divine wisdom, the chosen few tasked with a duty so sacred that even their names had been erased from the annals of time. They worked in silence, their breath shallow and steady as they dipped their quills into ink made from crushed starlight and rare herbs. Each stroke on the parchment felt as though it carried the weight of the heavens themselves. To them, the parables were not words they created but messages they received, delicate whispers carried on the wind or embedded in the rustling of leaves. It was said that only those whose hearts were pure and minds unshackled by worldly desires could hear these whispers. The scribes were not born, they were chosen. Legend spoke of a sacred night every 7 years when the high priestess would light a single flame in the temple's inner sanctum. Children from the surrounding villages would be brought forward, their eyes wide with wonder. One by one, they would step into the sanctum, their tiny hands clutching the talismans of their ancestors. The flame was said to flicker and dance differently for each child, but only those who made it burn steady and bright were taken in as scribes. The chosen ones were said to carry a spark of the divine within them, though no one could say exactly what that meant. Parents who left the temple without their children wept, not out of sorrow but reverence, knowing that their sons and daughters had been claimed by something far greater than mortal life. Once chosen, the scribes' lives became a mystery to those outside the temple walls. Stories circulated about their training, whispered in hushed tones around village fires. Some said they were taught to read the stars as if they were books, while others believed they were blindfolded for years, learning to hear the truth in silence. What is known is that the scribes rarely spoke, even to one another. Their voices were reserved for the parables, for the moments when the divine would speak through them. On nights when the stars shone brightest, the scribes gathered in a sacred grove, their steps careful and deliberate as if afraid to disturb the harmony of the universe. They would stand in a circle, their hands raised to the heavens. It was then that the voices came, soft at first, like the rustle of leaves in the wind, then rising, swelling, filling the air with a language no outsider could understand. Each scribe listened with an intensity that seemed almost otherworldly. They would later describe the process as if the words were being etched directly into their souls, bypassing the mind entirely. The parables often came in fragments, an image of a shepherd searching for a lost lamb, a mountain veiled in mist, a single drop of rain falling into an endless ocean. The scribes would write feverishly, their hands moving faster than thought, their eyes unfocused as if they were seeing a world beyond this one. Rituals guided their work, each step imbued with meaning. Before writing, they would bathe in water blessed under the light of the moon, their prayers carried upward by the smoke of sacred herbs. They believed that their bodies had to be as clean as their souls to act as vessels for the divine. When the first word of a parable was written, a bell would be rung, its sound echoing through the temple halls, signaling the birth of another fragment of wisdom. Their connection to the stars was undeniable. The scribes often spoke of moments when the constellations themselves seemed to align in response to the parables they were recording. During such nights, the skies would blaze with light, shooting stars streaking across the heavens as if the universe itself were blessing their work. Some villagers claimed they could feel the ground tremble lightly, a gentle reminder that what was being written was not merely for humans, but for the earth and the heavens alike. One particular night remains etched in the memories of those who lived near the temple. The moon had turned a deep, blood-red hue, and the air was heavy with a stillness that seemed to stretch time. The scribes had gathered in the sanctum, their movements unusually hurried, their whispers carrying a sense of urgency. When the bell finally rang, it was said to have rung louder and longer than ever before, a sound so pure it brought tears to the eyes of those who heard it. The parable written that night became the foundation of chapters 37 to 44, though no one but the scribes knew its contents at the time. Over the centuries, the work of the scribes has been likened to a dance between mortal and divine, their quills tracing the movements of an unseen hand. The rituals they performed were not simply traditions, but acts of faith, a way of aligning their hearts with the rhythm of the cosmos. Every word they wrote carried the weight of their ancestors' prayers and the hopes of generations yet unborn. Though their faces remain hidden and their names forgotten, the scribes' presence can still be felt in the pages of the Book of Parables. To read their work is to feel the echo of their footsteps, the brush of their robes as they moved through the sacred halls, and the quiet hum of their prayers rising like smoke to the heavens. The wind swept across the vast plains, carrying with it the scent of earth and the whispers of forgotten songs. Somewhere in the distance, the outline of a mountain range cut against the horizon, its peaks shrouded in clouds that seemed to glow faintly under the first light of dawn. This was a land where myths lived alongside history, where every stone, tree, and river bore witness to events too ancient to name. It was here, in this sacred and untamed world, that the Book of Parables was born. The people who walked these lands lived in harmony with forces they could not fully understand. Their cities rose like intricate sculptures, built from stone and adorned with carvings that told stories of gods, heroes, and creatures of the otherworld. Towers spiraled into the sky, their tips adorned with golden spires that caught the sunlight and cast shimmering reflections across the land. The air was alive with the hum of chants and the rhythms of drums, the heartbeat of a civilization deeply attuned to the sacred. In the shadow of these towering cities lay vast forests so dense that sunlight barely pierced their canopy. Within those woods, legend spoke of spirits who guarded ancient wisdom, their forms said to be as fluid as water and as fleeting as a breeze. Travelers moved through the trees with reverence, their steps careful and measured, for they believed the spirits watched from the shadows. Rivers carved through the land like veins of silver, their waters so clear they reflected the stars at night. These rivers were not just sources of life, but also pathways for messages from the heavens. It was said that the scribes would sometimes sit by the riverbanks, waiting for the rippling currents to reveal fragments of parables. The sound of the water was believed to carry the voices of the gods, their words hidden in the gentle murmur of flowing streams. One location, more sacred than all others, was a valley cradled by the mountains. This place, known as the Vale of Echoes, was a haven of silence so profound that even the wind seemed to hush as they passed through. Here, at the center of the valley, stood an ancient temple hewn directly from the mountainside. Its walls glimmered faintly, as though infused with the light of stars, and its entrances were guarded by statues of beings with eyes that seemed to watch those who approached. The temple was both a sanctuary and a mystery. Inside, its chambers twisted and turned like a labyrinth, leading to rooms filled with treasures no one could touch. At its heart lay a single room, circular and bare, save for an altar carved from a single slab of obsidian. This was said to be where the Book of Parables had first been inscribed, the altar acting as a conduit for divine messages. It was believed that the altar resonated with the energy of the heavens, and those who stood near it often claimed to hear faint melodies, as if the universe itself were singing. Beyond the valley, the land stretched endlessly, leading to other realms of wonder and danger. To the west, there were plains dotted with crumbling ruins, their walls overrun with ivy and their halls silent except for the rustle of leaves. These ruins were the remnants of a once great civilization that had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only fragments of their knowledge etched into stone tablets. To the east lay the Cobalt Sea, its waves shimmering with an iridescent glow under the moonlight. Sailors spoke of islands that appeared and disappeared with the tides, their shores littered with relics that defied explanation. One of these islands, called the Isle of Whispers, was said to hold a hidden chamber where some of the most sacred parables had been preserved. Few dared to approach the island, for the waters around it teemed with shadows that moved against the currents, their shapes defying logic. Northward, the land grew colder and harsher, giving way to icy wastelands where only the hardiest of souls could survive. Yet even here, in this frozen desolation, there were whispers of a city encased in ice, its spires reaching skyward like frozen flames. This city, called Lumini by those who believed in its existence, was said to be the final resting place of many lost chapters of the Book of Parables, preserved in eternal frost. Southward, the terrain turned to golden deserts, their dunes shifting like waves under the sun. Hidden beneath these sands were caverns that glowed with an inner light, their walls covered in ancient markings that resembled both language and art. Those who ventured into these caverns spoke of a presence that seemed to guide them, leading them to chambers where artifacts whispered secrets to those willing to listen. Some claimed that these caverns were where the earliest scribes had found inspiration for the first parables, their words shaped by the echoes of the past. Each of these locations carried its own stories, its own magic, and its own dangers. Together, they formed a world where the boundary between the mundane and the divine was thin, almost non-existent. This was a world where history and myth were one and the same, where every fragment of the Book of Parables was tied to the land that birthed it. The ancient world of the parables was not static but alive, constantly shifting and evolving. Its people understood that their connection to the divine was not something to be taken for granted. They built monuments and temples not just as places of worship but as reminders of their place within the grand tapestry of existence. To them, the Book of Parables was not simply a collection of stories but a living testament to their relationship with the unseen forces that guided their lives. The locations tied to the Book of Parables remain shrouded in mystery, their exact whereabouts known only to those who guard their secrets. But even now, traces of that ancient world linger in the whispers of the wind, the rustle of leaves, and the rippling of water. It is said that those who listen closely can still hear the echoes of the past, carrying with them the wisdom of a civilization that understood the profound beauty of the unknown. The candlelight flickered softly in the dim study as the old scholar traced his fingers over the faded manuscript. The ink had begun to blur with time, yet the numbers, 37 to 44, stood out as if written in fire. He paused, his hand trembling ever so slightly, overwhelmed not by age, but by the weight of the mystery before him. These chapters had haunted thinkers and dreamers for generations, their meaning elusive yet undeniably profound. The structure of the parables was unlike anything else, a puzzle woven into words. To read them was to feel both awe and unease, as though they carried a message too vast for the mind to contain. Scholars whispered of hidden patterns, of numbers that repeated like a heartbeat, and of phrases that seemed to align with the rhythm of the stars. It was not merely a text, it was a symphony, its notes scattered across time and space, waiting to be heard by those willing to listen. The numbers themselves held a sacred significance. The number 37 was whispered to be the number of divine alignment, a point where human understanding and celestial order briefly touched. To the ancients, it symbolized the beginning of insight, the first step toward unraveling the infinite. Meanwhile, the number 44 carried a heavier, more solemn weight. It was thought to signify the balance between light and shadow, a reminder that every truth carried within it the seeds of paradox. Together, these numbers framed a journey from awakening to transcendence, each step layered with meaning that could never be fully grasped. Within the parables, patterns emerged like threads in an intricate tapestry. Certain words echoed like distant thunder, appearing precisely 37 or 44 times across the chapters, as if guiding the reader to pause and reflect. The word path appeared 37 times, always tied to moments of decision, as if urging the reader to consider the roads they had chosen and those they had yet to take. Conversely, the word veil appeared 44 times, often in moments of revelation, reminding the reader of the thin barrier between the seen and unseen worlds. The sentences, too, carried a rhythm that felt almost musical. Linguists who studied the text spoke of patterns that mimicked the cycles of breath, the ebb and flow of tides, and the pulse of the human heart. Reading the parables aloud was said to bring a strange stillness to the air, as if the words themselves resonated with the very fabric of existence. Yet, for all its beauty, the structure of the parables also carried an undercurrent of enigma. Mystics often spoke of the missing syllable, a sound believed to be hidden within the text but never spoken. They claimed this syllable held the power to unlock truths beyond human comprehension, but no one knew what it was or where to find it. Some said it could be found by reading the chapters backward, while others insisted it would reveal itself only in dreams. Theories abounded about the purpose behind the structure of chapters 37 to 44. Some believed they were a map, each word a marker pointing to an undiscovered place of power. They pored over the text, matching phrases to celestial constellations, tracing lines on ancient maps, and even walking for days in search of landmarks described in the parables. One mystic claimed to have found a hidden spring by following the descriptions in chapter 39, its waters so pure they seemed to glimmer with an inner light. Others saw the chapters as a kind of divine algorithm, a blueprint for understanding the cycles of life and death. They spoke of how certain lines seemed to correspond to phases of the moon or the solstices and equinoxes. It was said that those who meditated on the chapters during these celestial events would experience visions of the universe unfolding before them, its secrets laid bare in a cascade of light and shadow. But not all interpretations were rooted in the stars. Some turned their gaze inward, seeing the structure of the parables as a reflection of the human soul. They noted how the chapters moved between moments of clarity and confusion, light and darkness, hope and despair. To read them was to walk through the corridors of one's own heart, to confront fears and dreams long buried. The linguistic layers of the text added yet another dimension. Certain phrases seemed to shift meaning depending on the reader's state of mind, as though the words themselves were alive. A simple line like "the river flows" could feel serene to one reader, ominous to another, and profoundly sorrowful to a third. It was said that the parables revealed only what the reader was ready to see, a mirror that reflected the truths we dared not face. For all its complexity, the structure of chapters 37 to 44 did not intimidate those who approached it with reverence. Instead, it invited them to linger, to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, and to find beauty in the questions it posed. There was a quiet power in its ambiguity, a reminder that some mysteries are meant to be lived rather than solved. The old scholar sighed, closing the manuscript with care. He looked out the window to the sky, where the stars shone faintly through a veil of clouds. In their light, he saw the same patterns that danced within the pages he had spent his life studying. For a moment, he felt the overwhelming weight of connection, not just to the text or the heavens, but to every soul who had ever read those words and felt their power. The fire burned low, casting long shadows on the walls of the gathering hall. The storyteller, an elder whose voice carried the weight of countless years, rose slowly from his seat. His movements were deliberate, his silence commanding. The room stilled as though even the air had paused to listen. Finally, in a voice as ancient as the earth itself, he spoke the first words of the first parable. In the time before the sun knew its path, a child was born beneath a sky heavy with stars, her cry filling the world with a sound so pure it seemed to awaken the heavens. She was neither ordinary nor divine, but stood on the threshold of both, her destiny unknown even to the gods who watched from afar. The first parable unfolded like a dream, its words woven with a rhythm that resonated in the hearts of those who heard it. At its core was a story of transformation, not just of the child but of the world itself. The parable spoke of wisdom earned through hardship, justice tempered by compassion, and the power of a single act to ripple outward and reshape destiny. Wisdom in the parable was not given freely but born of pain and perseverance. The child, whose name was never spoken, grew up in a land ravaged by discord, where the powerful ruled with indifference, and the weak suffered in silence. She saw the cruelty of the world and questioned why it was so. Her questions were met with scorn, but she did not stop asking. Instead, she sought the answers in places others feared to tread, in the silence of the forests, in the depths of the caves, and in the songs of the wind. One night, as she sat by the edge of a quiet river, a voice came to her, neither harsh nor gentle, but filled with an unshakable certainty. "The path to wisdom is not in knowing but in understanding," it said. She did not see who spoke, but the words stayed with her, guiding her as she began to piece together the fragments of a world too broken to fix all at once. Justice in the parable was not the swift vengeance of gods or the cold calculations of law, but something more profound and fragile. It was the recognition of the interconnectedness of all things, the understanding that to harm one was to harm all. The child's journey led her to a village at the edge of a barren plain, where a cruel lord had demanded more than the people could give. When the child confronted the lord, he laughed, dismissing her as no threat. But she did not fight him with swords or strength. Instead, she told him a story, a tale of a tree that bore fruit for all who tended it, but withered when greed consumed its roots. Her words were simple yet carried the weight of undeniable truth. The Lord, for all his power, could not ignore the clarity of her message. He relented, though not out of kindness, but because the story had planted a seed of doubt in his heart. Transformation was the soul of the parable, not just for the child, but for those she encountered and the world she sought to heal. Her journey was not one of conquest, but of quiet, persistent change. Where she walked, fields grew green again, not by magic, but by the labor of those who found hope in her presence. In one poignant moment, the parable described her meeting with a weaver, a woman whose hands had once created the finest tapestries, but now trembled with despair. The child sat with the weaver, sharing stories and laughter until the woman picked up her loom again. As the threads came together beneath her hands, the weaver's spirit seemed to mend, her sorrow woven into something beautiful and whole. The first parable drew on archetypes older than memory itself, themes that echoed across cultures and times. The child was the seeker, the one who left behind what was familiar to find what was true. She was the healer, who did not turn away from suffering but faced it with an open heart. She was the bringer of light, whose actions illuminated paths others could not see. The story carried echoes of other myths and legends, yet it was unique in its tenderness. It did not glorify the hero's strength or her triumphs, but the quiet courage she showed in the face of impossible odds. It was a reminder that even in a world filled with darkness, the smallest light could transform the night. When the storyteller finished, the hall was silent. The flames in the hearth had burned to embers, their glow soft and golden. No one spoke, for the words still hung in the air, too sacred to disturb. The themes of the first parable had taken root in their hearts, a seed of wisdom, justice, and transformation waiting to bloom. The winds carried a strange chill that evening, whispering through the hollow valleys and rustling the leaves like voices that spoke in riddles. At the edge of a village forgotten by time, a figure sat alone beneath a withered tree, their face shadowed by the dim light of a dying sun. This was the Shepherd of Shadows, though they had not yet earned the name. For now, they were just a young wanderer, a soul burdened by questions that seemed to have no answers and a heart heavy with grief they could not escape. Born under an ill-fated sky, the shepherd had always felt out of place, like a note in a song that didn't quite belong. The people of their village whispered of omens the night they came into the world, a sudden eclipse that cast the land in darkness, a murder of crows that circled above the birthing house. Though the shepherd's mother had held them close, vowing to shield them from the cruelty of such whispers, the weight of those shadows clung to them as they grew. Their days were spent tending flocks in the rugged hills, far from the wary eyes of the villagers. There, amidst the bramble and stone, the shepherd found a measure of peace, though their heart remained restless. They would watch the stars each night, searching their glittering expanse for a sign, anything to explain why the world felt both beautiful and broken, why they felt so unmoored in it. But the shadows that seemed to follow the shepherd were not content to let them be. One fateful day, as they guided their flock along a narrow pass, a wolf appeared. Its eyes gleamed, not with hunger, but with a cold, unyielding malice. The shepherd moved to protect the flock, raising their staff, but fear paralyzed them. In that moment, as the wolf struck, one of their sheep, a lamb they had raised since birth, was lost. The shepherd collapsed to their knees, their cries echoing through the hills. The loss felt unbearable, a cruel reminder of their inability to protect what they loved. That night, as they sat by the smoldering remains of their campfire, a voice seemed to rise from the darkness. "Why do you mourn?" it asked, soft yet unyielding. "The world is built on loss. It is the shadow that makes the light." The shepherd turned, but no one was there. Yet the words lingered, burrowing into their mind like a seed. For days, they could not escape them. They began to question everything, the nature of loss, the meaning of their life, and the strange pull they felt toward the unknown. One evening, the shepherd left their village, leaving behind the hills they had known all their life. They carried nothing but their staff and a small bundle of provisions, setting out toward the distant mountains where the sun seemed to sink into the earth each night. The villagers shook their heads, calling it folly, but the shepherd knew they could not stay. Their journey was arduous. The roads were treacherous, the weather unforgiving. Hunger gnawed at them, and their feet bled from endless miles across rocky terrain. Yet, Through it all, they pressed on, driven by something they could not name, a feeling that the answers they sought lay just beyond the horizon. In their travels, the shepherd encountered others who had faced their own shadows. There was the weaver who had lost her sight but wove tapestries of unparalleled beauty, each thread guided by memory and intuition. She told the shepherd, "Loss is a teacher, though its lessons are bitter. It shows us what we truly value." There was the old soldier who tended a garden in a quiet valley, his hands scarred from battles long past. He spoke of how he had once sought vengeance for those he had lost, but found only emptiness in his rage. "It was only when I planted these seeds," he said, "that I began to heal. Each bloom is a reminder that life persists, even after the darkest winters." These encounters planted something new in the shepherd, a sense that perhaps the shadows they carried were not a curse but a calling. They began to see patterns in the world around them, moments where light and shadow intertwined to create something neither could achieve alone. Their most profound trial came in a desolate canyon, where the sun never seemed to reach. There, they met an old hermit who lived in a cave, his face lined with age and wisdom. The hermit spoke in riddles, challenging the shepherd to confront their deepest fears. "Why do you carry your shadow as a burden?" he asked one night as they sat by a small fire. The shepherd hesitated. "Because it reminds me of my failures. Of what I've lost." The hermit leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "And yet it follows you. Have you never wondered why?" That night, the shepherd dreamed of a vast expanse of darkness, endless and suffocating. But as they walked through it, a faint light appeared, flickering like a distant flame. They moved toward it, their steps tentative at first, but growing surer. When they reached it, the light did not banish the darkness, but transformed it, casting it into shapes that revealed a path forward. When the shepherd awoke, they felt a strange calm, as if the pieces of a puzzle had begun to fall into place. They thanked the hermit and continued their journey, no longer afraid of the shadows that followed them. Instead, they began to see them as companions, guides that shaped the path ahead. The shepherd's journey was far from over, but something within them had shifted. The fear and doubt that had once weighed them down now seemed to fuel their steps. They began to understand that enlightenment was not a destination but a process, a constant balancing of light and shadow. And so, they walked on, their staff steady in their hand, their eyes fixed on the horizon. In their heart, a quiet resolve took root, growing stronger with each passing day. They were no longer just a wanderer. They were becoming the shepherd of shadows, a name that would one day echo through the ages, carrying with it the story of one who embraced the light not by fleeing the darkness, but by understanding it. The moon hung low, casting its silver glow over the barren expanse. Before the shepherd stretched for rivers, their waters shimmering with an unearthly light. Each river seemed to hum with its own essence, as though it carried more than water, something ancient and alive. The air was thick with tension, the kind that settles before a storm, as the shepherd stepped closer, their heart pounding. The first river was the river of courage, its current fierce and wild, rushing with a roar that drowned out every other sound. It churned with the weight of untamed power, its surface reflecting flashes of fire and shadow. The shepherd hesitated at the edge, their breath catching in their throat. Fear gripped them, its icy tendrils pulling at their resolve. But then, from the depths of memory, the shepherd recalled the weaver's gentle hands weaving threads into beauty, the soldier's scarred fingers planting seeds in the earth. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Clutching their staff tightly, they stepped into the raging waters. The river's strength was overwhelming, its current pulling and twisting with relentless force. The shepherd struggled, gasping for air, their limbs burning. But with each step forward, they felt a strange clarity, as though the chaos around them was sharpening their spirit. When they reached the other side, drenched and trembling, a warmth filled their chest. The river had not defeated them, it had revealed their strength. The second river lay in eerie stillness, its waters smooth as glass, reflecting the stars above with haunting precision. This was the river of wisdom. The shepherd approached cautiously, their reflection staring back with unsettling intensity. As they bent to touch the water, the surface rippled, and visions appeared, moments from their past, choices they had made, paths they had not taken. A child's laughter echoed, followed by the cry of a lamb lost to the wolf. The shepherd's heart ached as they relived the pain of their failures and the doubts that had plagued them. The river seemed to ask a silent question: would they carry the weight of their regrets, or would they learn from them? Sinking to their knees, the shepherd allowed the visions to flow, the tears mingling with the river. The images began to shift, showing not only loss but resilience. They saw themselves standing after every fall, seeking answers despite the silence. Wisdom was not about having all the answers, it was about asking the right questions. Rising with renewed clarity, the shepherd walked across the river, its waters parting gently beneath their feet. The third river glowed with a soft, golden light, its surface alive with ripples that danced like whispers of laughter. This was the river of compassion, and its beauty was deceptive. As the shepherd approached, they felt a pang of longing, an ache that seemed to arise from the depths of their soul. The river carried no physical challenge, but its waters revealed wounds unseen, the grief of the lamb lost, the loneliness of their wanderings, the pain of those they had left behind. The shepherd's knees buckled beneath the weight of these emotions. Their heart felt raw, exposed, as though the river was stripping away every barrier they had built to protect themselves. But then, a memory surfaced, of the weaver's laughter as she touched the threads of her loom, of the hermit's riddles that had forced the shepherd to face their fears. Compassion was born not from shielding oneself from pain but from embracing it, from understanding that to heal others, one must first be willing to feel deeply. With trembling hands, the shepherd cupped the river's golden water and pressed it to their chest. The ache softened, replaced by a warmth that radiated outward. Rising, they waded through the gentle current, their steps sure despite the tears streaming down their face. The fourth river was unlike the others. Its waters were dark, almost black, shimmering faintly under the moonlight. This was the river of justice, and it carried an aura of solemnity that made the shepherd's heart quicken. The air around it was heavy, each breath a struggle. Standing at its edge, the shepherd saw visions once again, this time, not of their own life, but of a world divided. A land where the powerful thrived while the weak were trampled. Faces appeared in the water, those of the villagers they had left, their eyes hollow with despair. The shepherd clenched their fists, anger rising like a storm. The river seemed to demand action, its waters swirling with an intensity that matched their rage. Justice felt like a fire, a force that demanded reckoning. But as the shepherd prepared to wade in, they remembered the hermit's words, "Why do you carry your shadow as a burden?" Justice was not about destruction but balance, about creating a world where all could thrive. The shepherd placed their staff into the water, watching as its ripples spread outward, breaking the visions into fragments. Stepping into the river, they felt its chill, but also its steadiness, as though it were grounding them. Each step through the river felt like a vow, to act not out of anger but out of a desire to heal, to ensure that no one else would bear the burdens they had carried alone. When they reached the other side, the darkness of the river lifted, replaced by the soft light of dawn. Standing at the far bank, the shepherd looked back at the four rivers, each flowing with its own life, its own lessons. They had faced fear, embraced wisdom, opened their heart to compassion, and chosen a justice rooted in understanding. And now, they stood ready to face whatever lay ahead, their spirit tempered by the trials of the rivers, their heart carrying the quiet strength of one who had learned not to fear the shadows, but to walk alongside them. The air shimmered with an unnatural heat, though the sun had long since sunk below the horizon. In the heart of a forgotten desert, surrounded by an endless sea of sand, the shepherd approached a circle of 7 flames that burned without fuel, their colors dancing in hues no mortal eyes had seen before. The silence was deafening, the world holding its breath as if awaiting some profound revelation. From the center of the flames emerged the oracle, their form shrouded in robes that seemed woven from the light of the fires themselves. Their face was obscured, yet their presence was undeniable, a force that commanded attention, demanded respect. The shepherd froze, a mixture of awe and trepidation surging through their chest. "You seek the path forward," the oracle said, their voice both ancient and ageless, carrying the weight of countless lifetimes. "But first, you must understand the power of the flame." The shepherd's gaze shifted to the 7 fires, each flickering with its own rhythm, as though alive. The first flame blazed red, fierce, and untamed, its heat palpable even from a distance. "This is the fire of beginnings," the oracle explained. "It destroys, but it also clears the way. From ashes, life is reborn." As the shepherds stared into the crimson flame, they saw flashes of their own life, moments of loss, the pain of leaving their home, the grief of the lamb lost to the wolf. But within the flame's chaotic dance, there was also renewal, the resolve born from those very losses, the strength that had carried them through the rivers. The second flame burned orange, its warmth steady and comforting. "The fire of transformation," the oracle murmured. "It tempers the soul, forging resilience from the raw material of suffering." The shepherd felt the heat seep into their skin, filling the cracks in their heart, binding together the pieces that had once felt irreparably broken. The third flame, golden as the morning sun, seemed almost gentle in its glow. Yet as the shepherd reached out, they recoiled at its searing intensity. "The fire of truth," said the oracle, their tone grave. "It reveals, but it also burns. To seek truth is to risk pain, for not all truths are kind." Images rose unbidden in the shepherd's mind, of the lies they had told themselves, the doubts they had hidden from view. Yet as the flame flickered, it cast those truths in a new light, stripping away their fear and leaving behind clarity. The fourth flame flickered green, its movements slower, more deliberate. "This is the fire of compassion," the oracle said, their voice softening. "It burns not to destroy, but to warm. It teaches that even in the fiercest blaze, there is room for kindness." The shepherd knelt before the flame, feeling its gentle heat wash over them. They thought of the weaver, the soldier, the hermit, each of whom had shared their wisdom and kindness without expecting anything in return. The shepherd's heart swelled with a quiet resolve to carry that same warmth forward. The fifth flame was blue, cool and ethereal, its light casting long shadows on the sand. "The fire of wisdom," the oracle intoned. "It does not rage, but its depth is infinite. To listen to its whisper is to understand the currents beneath the surface." As the shepherd gazed into the blue flame, they felt its stillness envelop them, calming the storm of their thoughts. They understood, for the first time, that wisdom was not about knowing everything, but about being still enough to hear what the world was already saying. The sixth flame burned violet, its light mysterious and otherworldly. "This is the fire of justice," the oracle said, their voice steady. "It burns for balance, for fairness. Yet its path is fraught with peril, for justice is a double-edged blade." The shepherd saw visions within the violet flame, of wrongs righted, but also of the cost of those actions. Justice was not a simple thing, they realized. It required courage, but also humility, a willingness to weigh each decision with care. The seventh flame was unlike the others. It burned white, its light blinding, its heat both comforting and terrifying. "The fire of unity," the oracle whispered. "It is all flames and none, the beginning and the end. It burns away separation, leaving only wholeness." The shepherd stepped closer, feeling the pull of the white flame. They saw fragments of their life within its glow, each trial, each triumph, each loss. All were threads in a tapestry they had not yet understood. The flame seemed to beckon them, urging them to step through. "Fire transforms," the oracle said, their voice echoing as if coming from everywhere at once. "It burns what no longer serves, and in its place, it forges something new. Will you face it?" The shepherd hesitated. The flames felt alive, their power immense, their potential both terrifying and wondrous. But as they stood there, they thought of the rivers they had crossed, the lessons they had learned. They thought of the lamb they had lost, and the lambs they might yet save. With a deep breath, they stepped forward, allowing the flames to envelop them. Pain seared through their body, but it was not the pain of destruction. It was the pain of transformation, of shedding old skin, of letting go of what no longer served them. When the flames subsided, the shepherd stood in silence, their body trembling, their heart racing. They felt changed, though they could not yet say how. The oracle stepped forward, their eyes gleaming beneath their hood. "You have faced the fire," they said, their voice filled with quiet reverence. "You are ready to carry its light. And with those words, the flames began to fade, one by one, until only the white flame remained, a single point of light in the vast darkness. The shepherds stared into it, their reflection shimmering within its glow. They did not yet know what lay ahead, but they knew that the fire within them would guide their path. The sun hung heavy in the sky, a molten disk that bleached the horizon into a shimmer of gold and white. The shepherd trudged forward, each step a small victory against the weight of the unyielding sand. Around them, the world was still, the silence pressing like a hand on their chest. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was thick, pregnant with the whispers of ghosts and the echoes of things long buried. The desert stretched endlessly, its dunes rising and falling like frozen waves. But in the distance, faint shapes began to emerge, jagged silhouettes against the glare of the sun. Ruins. Ancient and weathered, they seemed to crouch on the sands as though weighed down by centuries of regret. Broken towers pointed accusing fingers at the heavens, and crumbled walls lay scattered like the discarded bones of a forgotten giant. The shepherd approached cautiously, the air growing heavier with every step. The ruins seemed alive, their shadows curling and stretching as if remembering what they once were. A great arch stood at the entrance, its carvings so eroded they looked like wounds carved into stone. Beyond it lay the remnants of a city, a labyrinth of shattered palaces, collapsed temples, and streets swallowed by the sand. This was the desert of forgotten kings, a place whispered of in tales meant to warn the arrogant and the proud. Here, it was said, the rulers of ages past had built their empires, each one grander than the last. They had raised monuments to their own glory, towering obelisks and gleaming citadels meant to outlast the stars. But now, nothing remained of their dreams except these ruins, their names erased from the annals of history. The shepherd paused by a toppled statue, its face worn smooth by the relentless wind. Only the faint outline of a crown remained, a cruel irony etched in stone. Nearby, a broken inscription caught their eye, its words barely legible, "Forever shall I reign, and my name shall never fade." The shepherd traced the letters with trembling fingers, a hollow ache spreading in their chest. Forever had come and gone, and the name was now dust. The air grew colder as they ventured deeper, the ruins casting long shadows that seemed to twist and writhe. The shepherd felt the weight of unseen eyes, the presence of those who had walked these streets long ago. They knelt beside a crumbled altar, its surface blackened as if by fire. Fragments of pottery lay scattered around it, their patterns faded but still intricate, still beautiful. These, too, had been made by hands that once believed in their permanence. And yet, for all its desolation, the desert was not lifeless. In the cracks of the stones, small flowers bloomed, their petals fragile but defiant. A bird's cry echoed overhead, and the shepherd looked up to see its silhouette cutting across the sun. Life, it seemed, had not abandoned this place entirely. It had simply shifted, adapting to the ruins left behind. The shepherd's gaze turned to a distant temple, its facade half buried in the sand. Something about it called to them, a pull that was both gentle and insistent. They climbed the crumbling steps, their breath coming in shallow gasps. Inside, the air was cool and heavy with the scent of earth. Light filtered through cracks in the walls, illuminating carvings that lined the chamber. These carvings told a story, though the details were worn and fragmented. A king stood triumphant, his arms raised as crowds knelt before him. Another panel showed the king seated on a throne, his face proud but distant. The final image was different. The king knelt alone, his crown resting on the ground. His hands were outstretched, not in command, but in offering. The shepherd stared at the image for a long time, their mind racing with questions. Had the king renounced his power? Had he sought forgiveness? Or had he simply realized, too late, that his crown could not save him? A soft breeze stirred the air, carrying with it a faint melody, a haunting tune that seemed to rise from the stones themselves. The shepherd closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. It spoke of grandeur and decay, of dreams that had soared too high and fallen too far. It spoke of the fragile line between legacy and hubris, and the price of forgetting what truly matters. The shepherd opened their eyes, and for a moment, the ruins seemed to shimmer. The broken walls stood tall, the streets buzzed with life, and the air was filled with laughter and song. They saw kings and queens, their faces alight with ambition, their voices ringing with promises. But the vision shifted, the colors fading, the laughter turning to cries. The streets emptied, the walls cracked, and the sands began to creep in, erasing everything in their path. The shepherds sank to their knees, overwhelmed by the weight of what they had seen. These rulers had built their empires on the belief that they were eternal, that their greatness would outlast the ages. But the sands of time were merciless, and in their arrogance, they had forgotten the one truth that could have saved them, that nothing lasts forever. The breeze picked up, swirling sand around the shepherd as they rose to their feet. They turned to leave, but paused at the archway, their gaze lingering on the ruins one last time. This place was a graveyard, yes, but it was also a lesson, etched in stone and silence. It whispered of humility, of the importance of planting seeds that would grow beyond one's lifetime, of living not for monuments, but for the moments that truly endure. The shepherds stepped back into the desert, the sun casting their shadow long and slender on the sands. The ruins faded behind them, but their echoes remained, a quiet reminder carried on the wind. The wind howled against the rugged face of the mountain, a soundless scream that carried no echo. The air was thin, laced with a sharp chill that burned the skin but left the spirit strangely awake. Before the shepherd loomed the silent mountain, its peak hidden in a veil of shifting mist. It was not the tallest mountain they had ever seen, nor the most treacherous. Yet it radiated something far more imposing, a stillness so profound that it pressed against the mind, whispering of secrets too vast for words. The first step was hesitant. The ground was uneven, strewn with jagged rocks that seemed eager to shift beneath their weight. With each step forward, the shepherd felt a pull, not from the mountain, but from within, as though each movement tugged at the threads of something buried deep inside. The path was narrow, twisting between outcroppings of stone that loomed like sentinels. The air carried no scent, no sound except the crunch of boots against the frozen earth. It was a silence that demanded attention, leaving no room for distraction. The climb grew steeper, and the shepherd's breaths came harder, each one a cloud of white in the cold air. Their muscles burned, their limbs trembled, yet they pressed on. The higher they climbed, the more the mountain seemed to strip away, first the warmth of the sun, then the comforting weight of the earth below. It felt as though the shepherd was shedding layers, each one heavier than the last. At one point, the path narrowed to a sheer ledge, the abyss yawning on either side. The shepherd paused, their heart pounding in their ears. A single misstep could send them plummeting into the void, but turning back felt impossible. They gripped the rock face, their fingers numb against its icy surface, and moved forward with a precision born of fear and determination. Step by step, they crossed, the chasm below swallowing their shadow. When they reached the other side, they collapsed to their knees, their chest heaving. But the moment their hands touched the cold ground, they felt a shift. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, a lightness, as if the air itself had become softer. They looked up and saw that the mist was closer now, swirling in intricate patterns that seemed almost alive. The mountain's silence deepened, no longer oppressive but expectant, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The path climbed higher, cutting through cliffs and winding around jagged peaks. Along the way, the shepherd passed strange formations, boulders balanced precariously, their surfaces worn smooth, as though touched by countless hands. They came upon a frozen stream, its surface glittering like shattered glass, and a lone tree growing impossibly from a crack in the stone. Its branches were bare, yet it stood tall, unyielding against the wind. The sight stirred something in the shepherd, a quiet awe, a recognition of resilience. Hours passed, though it felt like days. Time seemed to warp on the mountain, stretching and folding in on itself. The shepherd climbed through moments of blinding light and enveloping shadow, each one a test of will. There were times when the mountain seemed to push back, its winds biting and relentless. And there were times when the silence was so profound that it felt as though the mountain was watching, waiting for something to emerge from within. As they climbed, memories began to surface, unbidden, vivid, and raw. They saw their own face, younger, filled with a hope that now felt foreign. They saw moments of failure, of pain, of decisions made in haste or fear. Each memory lingered like a weight in their chest, pulling them down. Yet with each step forward, the weight seemed to lift, the memories shifting from burdens to lessons. The shepherd began to see patterns in the pain, threads that connected even the darkest moments to something greater. Finally, the mist enveloped them completely, a swirling cocoon of gray and white. The world vanished, leaving only the shepherd and the mountain. The air grew impossibly still, and the silence reached a crescendo, filling their ears until it was all they could hear. In that silence, the shepherd stopped, their body trembling with exhaustion. They stood at the edge of something they could not name, a precipice not of stone but of the soul. And then they saw it, a faint glow ahead, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. It was not fire, nor light as they knew it, but something deeper, something that resonated in their very bones. They stepped toward it, each movement deliberate, their breath catching in their throat. The glow grew brighter, resolving into a pool of shimmering light nestled in a hollow of stone. It was impossibly still, its surface unbroken, yet it seemed to ripple with unseen currents. The shepherd knelt before the pool, their reflection staring back at them. But it was not the face they knew. It was older, the lines of wear and time etched deeply, yet it was also lighter, unburdened by fear or regret. The reflection met their gaze, its eyes filled with a quiet strength, and for the first time, the shepherd felt as though they truly saw themselves. The light pulsed again, and the surface of the pool shifted. Images rose and fell within it, stars burning against the void, rivers carving paths through mountains, and a single tree growing in a barren wasteland. The shepherd understood then that the mountain was not a place to conquer but a mirror, reflecting not what they were but what they could become. As they rose to their feet, the mist began to clear, revealing the peak bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The air was warm now, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. The shepherd took a step forward, their steps lighter, the silence no longer pressing but welcoming. They had not reached the summit, not entirely. But they had found something far greater, a clarity, a peace that burned brighter than any fire. The mountain watched as the shepherd continued upward, its silence echoing with the steady rhythm of their heartbeat. The chamber hung suspended in a void that defied all comprehension, a space neither of earth nor sky but of something older and eternal. The air shimmered with light that shifted colors like water catching the sun, and yet, it was not light at all but the essence of thought and will itself. There, at the heart of the void, sat the council of eternal beings. They were not of flesh and bone, but their presence was undeniable. Each one was a force, a manifestation of the great currents that shaped existence. Their forms flickered between shapes, symbols, and elements, as if they were the essence of everything they represented and more. One moment, a figure glimmered as a tree crowned with stars, the next, it was a serpent coiled around a sunlit orb. Their voices were not spoken but felt, resonating in vibrations that touched the deepest recesses of the mind. They had gathered to discuss a single thread of fate, the thread of the shepherd who had climbed the silent mountain. The being who embodied time sat first to speak, their form shimmering like 1,000 clocks spinning in unison. Their voice was slow yet unyielding, a rhythm of inevitability. The thread unravels too quickly, time intoned. The shepherd has walked a path that bends against the natural flow. It must be redirected before it tangles the greater weave. Beside time sat chaos, a figure of swirling shadows and bursts of flame, their laughter like distant thunder. Redirected? Chaos hissed. Why meddle when the shepherd's path has birthed such splendid unpredictability? Let them stray, let them stumble, let them fall. From the ashes, something wondrous might yet rise. Life sat opposite, their form a lush garden wrapped in the golden glow of sunrise. They spoke softly, yet their voice carried the weight of all things growing and decaying. Chaos, you forget that even destruction must serve the cycle. The shepherd's choices ripple far beyond their path. Their ascent up the mountain already blooms in unseen ways. To snuff it out now is to deny all that could be nurtured. Wisdom, cloaked in robes of shimmering light and shadow, lifted their staff, which seemed carved from the spine of an ancient galaxy. You speak of ripples, they said, their tone measured and deep. But the shepherd is not the only stone cast into the waters. Their actions echo not in isolation but in concert with countless others. Should they fail, the symphony falters. Should they succeed, it risks being too loud, drowning the balance. One by one, the beings spoke, each voice a prism of their nature. Death, a figure of obsidian silence, reminded them that all threads, no matter how vibrant, must eventually end. Joy, a radiant sphere of color and laughter, argued passionately for the shepherd's triumph, insisting that hope itself might hang in the balance. Grief, cloaked in a veil of starlit tears, spoke not with words, but with a melody that made even chaos fall silent. It was a song of what might be lost if the shepherd failed. The debate raged on, their voices intertwining, clashing, and merging like the currents of a vast ocean. And in the center of it all lay the thread, a single golden strand suspended in the air. It shimmered faintly, fragile yet unbroken, glowing with a light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the shepherd's heartbeat. Each pulse was a choice, a step, a moment of courage or doubt. The council watched it intently, their forms shifting with each beat, as though the thread's vibrations resonated within their very essence. Fate, the quietest of them all, finally rose. They did not shimmer or glow, but stood as a single, unbroken line of silver, their presence neither commanding nor meek. When they spoke, it was not a voice but a hum, a steady vibration that filled the void like a bow drawn across an infinite string. The shepherd has climbed higher than any before them, Fate said. Their journey is their own, yet it touches us all. To cut the thread now is to sever what may yet connect us. Chaos laughed again, a burst of sparks against the void. You speak as if you do not hold the scissors, Fate. Do you not decide where the thread ends? Fate did not answer directly, only gazed at the thread, their form unmoving. The shepherd's thread is not mine to sever. It moves with a will beyond even this council. For a moment, silence fell over the chamber, as profound as the silence on the mountain. Even chaos stilled, their flames dimming. The council turned their gaze inward, each one seeing not just the shepherd's thread, but the vast tapestry of existence it was woven into. Threads of light, shadow, and color stretched endlessly in all directions, crossing and tangling, breaking and mending. Some threads burned brightly, others faded into the void, but all were connected in ways even the council could not fully comprehend. Life spoke again, their voice like the rustle of leaves in a summer breeze. The shepherd is no different from any other thread, and yet they are unlike any that came before. Perhaps it is not their fate we debate, but our own. This time, even chaos nodded, their flames flickering thoughtfully. The council turned their focus back to the golden thread, and for the first time, they did not speak. They watched as it pulsed, its light steady and unwavering, as though the shepherd themselves were standing among them, listening. The thread pulsed once more, brighter than before, and the void seemed to hum with its rhythm. The council did not decide the shepherd's fate that day, for the thread's story was still being written. Instead, they watched, and they waited, each one a silent witness to the choices yet to come. The summit was shrouded in a mist that moved like a living thing, curling and parting in slow, deliberate patterns. It wasn't the mist of nature, but something heavier, charged with a presence that seemed to weigh down the very air. The shepherd stood at its edge, heart pounding with an unnameable force. This was the veil of revelation, a boundary between what was known and what lay beyond. Every step toward it felt monumental, as if the ground itself bore witness to the weight of the moment. The whispers started softly, a murmur that brushed against the edges of the shepherd's consciousness. They came from nowhere yet felt impossibly close, words spoken in a language older than the stars, but somehow familiar. With each step, the whispers grew louder, layering over one another until they became a chorus that vibrated in the shepherd's chest. It wasn't a sound, it was a feeling, a truth pressing against the walls of the soul. The shepherd reached out a trembling hand and touched the veil. It was warm, pulsating like a heartbeat. And then, without warning, it parted, dissolving into streams of light that wrapped around the shepherd and drew them forward. The world beyond the veil was not a world at all, but a space of infinite reflection. It was as if the universe had folded itself into a single, boundless mirror. There, suspended in the light, the shepherds saw themselves, not as they had been, not even as they were, but as they truly were. Every scar, every triumph, every failure and dream, every hidden thought and buried fear, they all swirled together, forming a mosaic of breathtaking complexity. The shepherd fell to their knees, overwhelmed. It was too much, too raw, too real. But the light didn't relent. It held them gently but firmly, refusing to let them turn away. And then, as the shepherd gazed deeper, they began to see beyond themselves. Their own image rippled and shifted, revealing countless others. Faces of strangers and loved ones, ancestors and descendants, all woven together in an unbroken chain. Their joys and sorrows echoed through the light, intertwining in ways that made the shepherd's heart ache and soar at once. The whispers returned, clearer now, forming words that resonated like thunder. You are not alone. It was not a statement but a revelation, a truth so profound that it shook the very foundation of the shepherd's being. They saw how every choice they had made, every step they had taken, had not just shaped their own path but had rippled outward, touching lives they would never know. And in turn, their own journey had been shaped by countless others, by sacrifices made long before they were born, by kindnesses given without expectation, by unseen forces that worked tirelessly to hold the fragile web of existence together. The shepherd's tears flowed freely, falling into the light and becoming part of it. They understood now what the climb, the trials, the fires, and the silence had been preparing them for. The journey had never been about reaching the summit. It had been about peeling away the illusions that had kept them blind to this truth. The mountain, the rivers, the desert, the council, they were all reflections, mirrors held up to their soul to strip away everything false and reveal what was real. A figure emerged from the light, neither man nor woman, neither old nor young. They radiated a calm that stilled even the shepherd's trembling. When they spoke, it was not with words, but with a knowing that settled into the shepherd's heart. You sought wisdom, but wisdom is not found, it is lived. You sought justice, but justice is not given, it is created. You sought transformation, but transformation is not an end, it is a beginning. The shepherd nodded, though no words came. They felt as if they had been emptied of everything they had carried, the doubts, the fears, the endless questions, and in their place was a quiet, steady flame. It wasn't the roaring fire of ambition or the flickering spark of hope. It was something deeper, more enduring, a flame that needed no fuel, for it burned from the core of existence itself. The figure extended a hand, and the shepherd took it. In that moment, the veil returned, its mist swirling around them once more. But this time, it wasn't a barrier. It was a bridge, a reminder that the revelation wasn't an escape from the world, but a call to return to it. The shepherd rose to their feet, and as they stepped back through the veil, they carried the light within them. It wasn't a blinding, otherworldly glow, but a quiet radiance, the kind that could only be seen in the way a person walked, the way they listened, the way they loved. As the summit faded behind them, the world seemed both unchanged and utterly transformed. The sky was still vast, the wind still cold, the path still steep. But the shepherd saw now what they hadn't before, the threads that connected everything, the light that pulsed in every shadow. The journey wasn't over. It never would be. But the shepherd no longer feared the trials ahead, for they understood now that every step mattered, not because of where it led, but because of what it meant. And as they began their descent, a single thought echoed in their mind, as clear and undeniable as the whispers in the veil: every step is sacred. Every step is enough, ****, the symbols were there, waiting to be noticed, as ancient and timeless as the land itself. Every detail, every twist of the narrative carried more than just a story, it carried a message. The shepherd, standing on the precipice of understanding, could feel the weight of these symbols pressing against them, not in the heavy way of obligation, but in the subtle, tugging way of truth. First, there was the mountain. Tall, unyielding, its peak hidden in the clouds. On the surface, it appeared to be just a physical challenge, a test of strength, a mark of accomplishment. But as the shepherd climbed higher, the true meaning of the mountain began to emerge. The mountain was not simply a place to reach, it was a reflection of the internal journey. It was the climb towards self-understanding, the ascent to reach beyond the limits imposed by the world. The shepherd's struggle against the mountain was a struggle against their own doubts, their own weaknesses. With each step, they had to face the truth about who they were, about what they feared, about what held them back. The mountain stood as a symbol of every internal battle, a battle that was never won with mere force, but with acceptance, humility, and patience. The river came next. At first, it seemed simple, a barrier to cross, a challenge to overcome. But the river was more than just water, it was the flow of time, the stream of life itself. Its currents were the unpredictable twists and turns that carried the shepherd forward, whether they wished to be moved or not. The river's water represented the emotional tide of existence, the joy, the sorrow, the love, and the loss. No one could stop the river. No one could escape its pull. And yet, as the shepherd stepped into its waters, they discovered something remarkable. The river wasn't just something to cross. It was something to move with. It wasn't a force to fight, but to surrender to, knowing that the journey through the waters of life could be both painful and beautiful. The river was a reminder that life, in all its chaos and beauty, flowed on whether we were ready for it or not. Then, there were the flames. The 7 flames that burned brightly, illuminating the darkness. They didn't just represent fire. No, the flames were a deeper symbol. Each flame was a virtue, a force of transformation. One flame was courage, another wisdom, another compassion. The flames did not simply burn, they purified, they revealed. The shepherd's struggle with the flames wasn't a struggle against the heat or the fire itself, but a test of their inner strength. Would they have the courage to face their deepest fears? Would they have the wisdom to choose the right path in the midst of uncertainty? Would they have the compassion to forgive, both themselves and others? The flames were the trials of the Spirit, and each one left the shepherd burned, but also reborn. Through the flames, the shepherd was transformed, not by avoiding pain, but by embracing it. The flames were the symbols of growth, of shedding the old to make room for something better. And there was the desert, barren and endless. At first glance, the desert seemed to hold nothing but emptiness, a place of loneliness, a place of silence. But silence, the shepherd would soon learn, was a teacher in its own right. The desert was where the past could no longer speak, where every echo of the former world was silenced. It was here that the shepherd faced the deepest truth of all, that they were not defined by the past, by the kingdoms that had fallen or the glory that had been forgotten. The desert represented the humility of being lost, of feeling small against the vastness of the world. But in that silence, the shepherd found clarity. The desert was not a void, it was a place of rebirth. It was where the self could be stripped of all the falsehoods it had built up over time. In the stillness of the desert, the shepherd discovered their true essence, the core of who they were meant to be. The desert didn't just take away, it gave, it revealed. Finally, there was the veil. The barrier that separated the known from the unknown. It was a symbol not of finality, but of revelation. When the shepherd crossed it, they didn't step into another world, they stepped deeper into themselves. The veil represented the barriers we put up to protect ourselves from the painful truths we refuse to see. It was the point where illusion broke away, where clarity shone through. It was both the end of the journey and the beginning of something new. By crossing the veil, the shepherd didn't just enter a new realm, they entered a new understanding of what it meant to be fully alive. The veil was the final test, the last step in the process of transformation. To cross it was to let go of fear, to let go of doubt, to embrace the light even when it was blinding. Each of these symbols, the mountain, the river, the flames, the desert, the veil, was more than just a part of the shepherd's journey. They were representations of the struggles we all face, the trials of the heart and spirit that define the human experience. And the shepherd's ability to face them, to move through them, was not a sign of strength, but a sign of understanding. The shepherd didn't conquer the mountain or master the river, they surrendered to them, they accepted them, and in doing so, they discovered the deeper meaning behind each symbol. This journey, this parable, was a reminder that life's struggles are not obstacles to be avoided, but lessons to be learned. That wisdom is not something that can be gained from books or teachers, but from the very act of living, of choosing, of failing and trying again. That transformation doesn't come from changing the world around us, but from changing ourselves, from shedding the layers that no longer serve us and embracing the person we are meant to become. The symbols were not just metaphors, they were living truths. And the shepherd story, like the stories of all who walk the path of life, was one of continual revelation. There was no end to the journey. There was only the next symbol, the next trial, the next lesson. Each one was an invitation to look deeper, to understand more fully, and to grow. The shepherd, standing at the edge of the veil, knew this truth now. The symbols had spoken. The story had been told. And yet, the real journey was just beginning. In the quiet spaces between history's loudest moments, where time seems to fade like the whisper of a distant storm, there exists a truth. It's a truth carried in the hearts of storytellers, philosophers, and dreamers. The echoes of the first parable, though soft at first, would ripple through the centuries, shaping the minds of those who would come after. In the quiet moments when one stares into the vastness of the unknown, the parable's story lives on, stirring hearts, bending minds, and guiding souls. It began in the farthest reaches of time, like a spark igniting a fire in the deepest shadows. The first parable was more than a story, it was a thread that wove its way through countless myths, philosophies, and teachings, leaving an indelible mark wherever it passed. The shepherd's climb, the river they crossed, the flames they endured, it all became a symbol that would echo for ages, resonating in the tales of gods and mortals alike. It was in the stories of ancient civilizations that the echoes began to form. You could hear its murmur in the epic poems, the ones written by poets whose words held the power to capture the very heart of humanity. There, the mountain stood tall once again, its peaks crowned with the same mysteries, its base resting in the same dark soil of self-doubt. You could see the river rushing, representing the endless passage of time, with its currents both gentle and violent. The flames would burn bright in these stories, casting shadows and light in equal measure, symbolizing the trials of the human spirit. The shepherd's journey had become universal, transformed into the very symbols that people would turn to for understanding. The parable's influence wasn't limited to myth alone. It seeped into the teachings of great minds, the philosophers who sought the deepest meaning of existence. In their words, the parable's mountain became more than a physical climb, it was a metaphor for the climb of the soul, a path leading toward enlightenment, where every step taken was one closer to understanding the world and the self. And the river represented more than just the flow of time. It became the idea that life itself could not be controlled, it must be lived with grace, with acceptance, and with the awareness that every current, no matter how swift, carried with it lessons to be learned. It was as if the parable had woven itself into the very fabric of thought, pulling at the minds of those who sought answers. The flames that burned through the first parable would rise again in countless philosophies. In the burning light of those flames, they saw the virtues that transformed the human soul, courage to face fears, wisdom to make difficult choices, compassion to heal wounds, and justice to restore balance. It wasn't simply a story about trials, it was about transformation, the painful and beautiful process of becoming whole. The flames burned away the false self, revealing the truth beneath. This, too, became a central teaching as philosophers pondered how the human spirit could be refined, shaped, and ultimately perfected. The flame's transformative power was a concept that transcended time, guiding the thoughts of sages, mystics, and thinkers. The desert, too, left its mark. The desert was a place where the past was no more, where the weight of history had faded into dust. In the quiet isolation of the desert, the soul was laid bare, unprotected from the raw truths of life. This symbolism became a central idea in many later philosophies, where silence and solitude were seen as necessary conditions for self-discovery. The idea that one must look inward, leave behind the noise of the world, and confront the past to move forward, that idea, too, echoed from the first parable, whispering its wisdom across the ages. But it wasn't just in philosophy where the parable left its trace. It found its way into the hearts of those who crafted stories, both ancient and modern. It lingered in the sagas of great heroes and heroines, those who set out on impossible quests, faced unimaginable trials, and returned changed. The shepherd's struggles became the archetype for the hero's journey, a template that would echo through every myth, every legend, every story of transformation. The heroes fight with their own limitations, their struggle against time and circumstance, their tests of courage and wisdom. These were not just themes. They were the foundation of storytelling itself. The first parable gave birth to a new kind of heroism, one that was not about victory over others, but victory over the self. The parable's influence also stretched into spiritual traditions, where it served as the blueprint for the seeker's path. In mystical texts, the journey through the river, the fire, and the desert became the stages of spiritual awakening. It was in these spaces, where each trial was faced with humility and grace, that the soul was purified. The shepherd's climb became a reflection of the ascension toward divinity, toward the highest understanding. The river of time was seen not as a force to fear, but a current that carried the soul toward its ultimate purpose. The flames of virtue became the trials that would shape the spiritual seeker into someone more aligned with the divine. In every corner of the world, from the myths of the East to the fables of the West, the echoes of the first parable were heard. In the teachings of the Buddha, the journey was one of self-realization, just as the shepherd found their truth through their trials. In the legends of the Greeks, the hero's journey mirrored the shepherd's climb, their encounter with darkness, and their eventual transformation. Even in the sacred texts of ancient cultures, the symbols of the mountain, river, fire, and desert reappeared, each representing the same timeless struggle to understand the self and the world. Over the centuries, the first parable became more than just a story. It became a guiding principle. Its themes, wisdom, courage, transformation, humility, became universal truths that transcended cultural boundaries, language barriers, and the passage of time. The parable wasn't just remembered, it was lived. It found its place in the hearts of those who sought meaning, in the actions of those who fought for justice, in the souls of those who longed for wisdom. The parable's influence was subtle, but undeniable. It showed up in the most unexpected places, in the quiet moments of reflection, in the harsh trials of life, in the courage to face the unknown. Its symbols continued to resonate because they were not just part of an ancient myth. They were part of the human experience itself. They represented something deep and enduring in all of us, the struggle to find meaning, to grow, to transform. The echoes of the first parable had become woven into the fabric of life, stretching across time, carrying with them the wisdom of ages. And they would continue to echo, long after the words of the story had faded from memory, in the hearts of all who understood that the journey, no matter how long or hard, was always worth taking. The ink on the parchment was faded, but the words, carefully etched in delicate strokes, still held the weight of centuries. As the candlelight flickered, a gentle breeze ruffled the edges of the scroll, but the scribe's hand remained steady. With each word, there was a sense of timelessness, as though the thoughts being recorded were not just reflections of the past, but whispers of something eternal. I write not for the fleeting time in which I live, the scribe's commentary began, but for the souls who shall come after, those who will look to these words and find meaning in them when the world has changed beyond recognition. The parable I inscribe here is not merely a tale of one man, nor is it bound by the limits of the land where it was first told. It is a story meant for the ages. The scribe paused, fingers trembling as the weight of those words sank in. He had seen countless individuals pass through his life, seeking knowledge in the dusty corners of the temple, in the crowded markets, and even in the silence of the night. Each one had been searching, unknowingly, for the same thing. A meaning that stretched beyond the brief flicker of their lives. He knew the parable well, had known it all his life, but the more he pondered it, the more its depth seemed to reveal itself in layers, hidden and mysterious, like the roots of an ancient tree. "This is the tale of a shepherd," he wrote, his quill scratching against the parchment. But he is no ordinary shepherd. He is a wanderer, a seeker, much like all of us. We all walk the earth in search of something we cannot see, and like him, we must confront what lies hidden in the shadow of our own hearts. The trials he faces are not his alone, they are ours. We are the ones who must cross the rivers of fear, climb the mountains of doubt, and endure the flames of transformation. It is not the shepherd who speaks to us, but the silent voice of the journey itself. The scribe's hand shook slightly, not from age or weakness, but from the weight of understanding that had settled over him. He had often asked himself why the shepherd's journey was so difficult. The rivers, the fires, the mountains, they were not easy trials. They were relentless, unforgiving, and yet they were essential. Without them, the shepherd would never have reached the truth he sought. And so it was with all who sought meaning. The trials, difficult as they were the very things that shaped them. Who among us has not stood at the edge of the river, the scribe continued, his mind wandering to his own struggles, and wondered whether the current would carry us away. The river is not a mere obstacle, it is a test. It asks us whether we are willing to let go of our past, to surrender to the flow of time. It is the river that teaches us to trust, to flow with the current of life, and in doing so, we are reborn. We do not control the river, it controls us, but only when we allow it to. The question is not whether the river will take us, but whether we are ready to be taken. The scribe's gaze drifted to the mountains, looming far in the distance, their jagged peaks piercing the sky. He could feel the weight of them pressing down on his chest. The mountains were more than just a physical barrier, they were the walls of the soul. Every climb, every ascent, was an inner struggle. It was not the mountain that was the true enemy, but the fear that prevented the climb. The scribe had seen it in the faces of those who sought wisdom, in the trembling hearts of those who faced their own limitations and wondered whether they would ever reach the top. Climbing the mountain is a metaphor, the scribe wrote, his words firm, for the climb within. It is not the summit that matters, it is the journey. The moments of doubt, the exhaustion of the climb, the fear of falling, it is all part of the process. If we only focus on the top, we miss the beauty in every step. The mountain teaches us patience, humility, and the understanding that the path is just as important as the destination. But it was the fire, the flames, that truly haunted him. He had often wondered why it was that the shepherd, after crossing the river and scaling the mountain, was forced to face the fire. The flames consumed everything in their path. There was no escaping them. They were the ultimate trial, and yet, it was through the fire that the shepherd was forged into something greater. The scribe knew this truth too well. The flames are not to be feared, he wrote, his quill trembling, but embraced. They are the catalyst for change. They burn away all that is false and leave only the truth behind. The shepherd, like all of us, must pass through the fire. It is the fire that forges the spirit, that strips away the layers of the self we no longer need, that forces us to confront who we truly are. Only through fire can we truly be reborn. The scribe paused, his thoughts turning inward as he reflected on the nature of the parable's lessons. These were not just philosophical ideas, they were living truths. They had shaped his life, and they had shaped the lives of those who had read the story before him. He had seen people come to the parable with empty hearts and leave with something greater. It was as if the journey of the shepherd had somehow been passed down to them, woven into the very fabric of their souls. And yet, the scribe wrote, his hand growing still, there is another truth. One that we are often too quick to overlook. The shepherd's journey is not one of finality. The mountain does not end, nor does the river cease to flow. The fire does not burn forever. The parable speaks to the endless nature of the soul's journey, the constant striving for meaning, the eternal seeking of truth. Each trial faced is not an end, but a new beginning. The shepherd continues his walk, and so must we. The scribe's quill came to a gentle stop. His words, though penned in the past, still held the warmth of a living truth. And in the silence of that moment, as the candle flickered and the night pressed in, the scribe could almost hear the voice of the shepherd, his journey, his struggles, his transformation, whispering across time. It was a reminder that the path to understanding, to wisdom, to self-realization, was not one taken alone. It was a shared journey, carried in the hearts of all who dared to seek. The rain tapped lightly against the window as the world outside seemed to hold its breath. A stillness, the kind that settles deep into your bones, had taken over the room. The soft crackling of a fire in the hearth was the only sound, but even it felt distant, almost as if the flames themselves were trying to share something profound. A single thought swirled in the air, more vivid than any spoken word. What does it mean to seek? The parable had taught many things, but the lessons it left behind weren't just for those who lived in the distant past. There were whispers for those who walked today, whose hearts were filled with questions and whose lives seemed overwhelmed with uncertainty. In a world that often feels like it is constantly rushing forward, chasing after things that seem more important than our own peace, these lessons stood as quiet reminders that sometimes the answers aren't out there in the noise. They're buried inside of us, waiting to be discovered. The first lesson is simple but powerful. Every journey begins with a question. The shepherd started with uncertainty, not knowing where the path would lead or what it would ask of him. It is not the destination that matters first, but the desire to know. To seek. How often do we wait for everything to be clear, for all the answers to come neatly wrapped, before we take a step? How many of us have stood at the edge of the unknown, hesitating, afraid to move forward because the journey seemed too uncertain? The truth is, that hesitation, those moments of standing still, is part of the journey itself. It's a call to action, a challenge to look beyond the surface and ask ourselves, what are we truly seeking? It might be peace, understanding, love, or something much deeper. Whatever it is, it begins with the courage to step forward, even when we can't see the full path. The shepherd walked into darkness, yet found the light he sought not by avoiding the unknown, but by stepping into it. The second lesson is more profound. The obstacles we face are often the very things that shape us. The river, the mountain, and the fire, they weren't just physical trials. They were the manifestations of inner struggles. The river wasn't merely a body of water, it was the tide of our emotions, fears, and regrets. The mountain wasn't simply a towering peak, but the weight of doubt and self-limitation. The fire wasn't just an element of nature, it was the searing pain of transformation. Life often feels like it's throwing obstacles our way, broken dreams, lost loved ones, failures we can't undo. But in the very heart of these challenges, there's something we can't see in the moment. They're pushing us to become something greater. Just as the shepherd learned that to cross the river, he had to let go of the past, we too are reminded that the things we hold on to often prevent us from moving forward. The mountain we climb isn't just an external barrier, it is a reflection of all the fears we've carried, waiting to be overcome. The fire? It's where our most painful experiences burn away the parts of us that no longer serve our growth, leaving us ready to embrace something new. Transformation requires surrender. It is not enough to fight the storms or run from the flames. The lesson isn't in escaping, but in surrendering to the process. How often do we try to control everything? How many times do we resist change, hold tightly to what's comfortable, even when it's not right for us? The shepherd's journey was about letting go, of fears, of attachments, and even of the illusion that we can ever fully control the path we walk. When we stop fighting, when we stop fearing the unknown, we make room for something profound to unfold. Then, there is a lesson that speaks directly to the heart of every seeker. Wisdom is found not in the answers, but in the questions. The shepherd wasn't given all the answers. He didn't reach the end of his journey to find a neatly packaged conclusion. Instead, he gained the ability to ask deeper, more meaningful questions. What are we really seeking in our lives? Is it success? Or is it understanding? What is the true purpose behind our striving? In the silence of the night, when all the distractions fade away, those questions become clearer. And perhaps, the most beautiful part of seeking is not in finding the answer, but in the pursuit itself. The act of questioning, of exploring, of being open to the mysteries around and within us, that is where growth happens. Every person you meet, every experience you have, every moment of pain or joy carries an answer if you are willing to look beneath the surface. As the scribe once wrote, the river does not ask you to understand its path, it simply invites you to flow with it. This speaks to the heart of so many seekers. We spend so much time trying to figure it all out, to dissect every moment, that we forget to simply live in it. The river flows, the mountain stands, and the fire burns, not to be conquered, but to be experienced. We, too, must learn to move with life, not against it. Lastly, there is the undeniable lesson of humility. The shepherd was not above his trials, nor was he exempt from suffering. His story reminds us that we are all human, flawed, imperfect, and fragile. The pride of thinking we know it all, that we are immune to the struggles of life, is a wall that prevents us from growth. The parable teaches that no matter how far we go, no matter how many mountains we climb, we must always remain humble. Life is bigger than us, and in this vastness, we are but a small part of something greater. The true wisdom lies in acknowledging this and accepting our place within the greater whole. As the evening draws on and the fire burns low, one truth remains clear: the lessons we take from the shepherd's journey are not bound by time or place. They speak directly to the human condition. In every question we ask, and every trial we face, and every surrender we make, we are walking the same path the shepherd walked. It is a path that requires us to step forward with faith, to embrace the unknown with courage, and to trust that even in our darkest moments, the light will find us. The wind howled outside, the night thick with the kind of silence that blankets the world before the dawn. In the dim glow of a flickering candle, ancient scrolls lay scattered across the table. Their worn pages carried the weight of wisdom that had been passed down for centuries, and yet, the symbols written upon them seemed to pulse with life, calling to something deeper within. One symbol stood out, a circle with a line through it, ancient, yet unmistakably familiar. Was it a symbol of truth? Of eternity? Or something else entirely? Every story, every legend, carries more than one face. It's the nature of the world. No matter where you are, no matter when you live, the stories you tell take on new meaning with each telling. The first parable, much like any enduring tale, has traveled across cultures, passed through the hands of many, and taken on different shapes as it weaves through the tapestry of human history. To some, it is a journey of the soul; to others, a story of the human struggle. Each interpretation, like a thread in a great, ever-expanding web, pulls at the very fabric of our understanding, offering something new each time it is touched. In the vast deserts of the Middle East, where the sun burns fierce and the wind whispers ancient secrets, the first parable is seen not just as the story of a shepherd, but as a metaphor for the eternal battle between light and darkness. The shepherd, wandering through desolation, is not merely seeking knowledge or wisdom. To these storytellers, his journey represents a soul's quest for salvation, a fight against the shadows that creep into every heart. Here, the rivers are not simply obstacles; they are the forces of temptation, sin, and doubt that flood the path of the faithful. The fire, then, becomes the test of purification, where the soul is made ready for the eternal light. Yet, thousands of miles away, in the mountains of Asia, the first parable is seen through a completely different lens. In these lands, where the peaks rise higher than the heavens themselves, the shepherd's journey is a tale of self-realization. To the philosophers and mystics of the East, the trials represent stages of spiritual enlightenment. The river is the flow of emotions, the mountain symbolizes the obstacles of the mind, and the fire is the burning desire for inner peace. This path, however, is not one of battle. It is one of surrender. To those who walk the ancient paths of Asia, the first parable is not about conquering the trials; it's about letting go of the need to control them. The shepherd's journey is not a struggle to overcome, but a delicate dance of yielding to the flow of life, embracing the ebb and tide with grace. Then, in the ancient forests of Europe, among people whose ancestors revered the stars and worshipped nature's cycles, the interpretation takes yet another shape. Here, the first parable is a story of balance, a lesson in harmony between man and the earth. The shepherd is not a lone wanderer, but one deeply connected to the world around him, listening to the whispers of the wind, the songs of the trees, and the call of the animals. The rivers are not just obstacles, but symbols of the flow of life itself. They carry the essence of the natural world, each one a mirror reflecting the ebb and flow of human existence. The mountain, in this interpretation, is not something to climb, but something to understand, a symbol of the earth's wisdom that has stood for millennia. And the fire? The fire is life. It is the warmth of the hearth, the spark of creation, the flame that can either destroy or illuminate, depending on how it is handled. What's most fascinating is that no matter the land, no matter the culture, the essence of the first parable speaks to something universal within the human heart. There is something about the struggles the shepherd faces, the rivers he crosses, the fire he endures, that touches the core of our very being. It doesn't matter if you are in the scorching heat of the desert, the freezing peaks of the mountains, or the lush forests where the trees seem to whisper ancient songs. These trials speak to the depths of the human spirit, asking us to reflect on our own paths, our own trials, and the very nature of the challenges we face in our own lives. In the highlands of Africa, where the sky stretches endless and the earth below hums with energy, the first parable is told as a journey of the community rather than the individual. Here, the shepherd's path is not his alone, but a reflection of the entire village. The rivers are not merely physical divides, they represent the boundaries between individuals, families, and tribes. Crossing them is not just a personal journey, but a collective effort. The mountain is a symbol of the ancestral spirits watching over them, guiding them through each trial, and the fire represents both the warmth of community and the harsh reality of life's unpredictability. In this version, the shepherd's struggle is not just for wisdom or enlightenment, but for the survival and prosperity of those he loves. What all these interpretations reveal is a timeless truth. The first parable is not just one story, but a mirror held up to every culture, every era. It reflects back the values, beliefs, and challenges of the people who encounter it. Whether it is the battle between light and darkness, the surrender to the flow of life, the call to harmony with nature, or the struggle for community survival, the core message remains the same. The journey is not just about the shepherd. It is about every one of us. We each face our own rivers, our own mountains, and our own fires. And how we respond to them shapes our story. And yet, the stories don't end with these cultures. The first parable has continued to spread, evolving with the winds of change. In the heart of Western philosophy, it becomes a narrative of reason versus emotion. The shepherd's struggle is interpreted as a battle between the intellect and the heart. In this view, the rivers represent the flood of emotions that often cloud clear thinking, while the mountain is the struggle to maintain reason amidst chaos. The fire, then, becomes the burning drive of the human intellect, the spark of curiosity that leads to understanding. No matter where you look, the story takes on a life of its own, shifting and transforming, yet always carrying with it the same unyielding question: what is it that we seek? It is a question that transcends culture, time, and space, calling to something deep within every heart. Each interpretation, whether drawn from the deserts of the East, the mountains of the West, the forests of the North, or the highlands of Africa, speaks to the same universal truth, that the path we walk, with all its trials, is one we must face together, as individuals, as communities, and as part of something much larger than ourselves. The candle flickered, casting shadows on the walls as the night outside deepened. And in that quiet moment, the question echoed once more, hanging in the air, as timeless as the stars above: what is it that we seek? The silence in the room felt almost suffocating. The candlelight flickered, casting long shadows across the walls, as if trying to make sense of what was once whole, but now incomplete. An old, dusty manuscript lay open on the table, its pages yellowed and fragile, but its words still sharp, still full of life. Yet, as the pages turned, something began to feel wrong. There was an unnatural break in the rhythm of the story, a sudden gap, a missing space that tugged at something deeper. The pages didn't stop, but they skipped. They skipped over entire chapters. And within that missing space, something powerful was lost, something that might never be fully understood. The manuscript, incomplete as it was, carried the weight of 1,000 years of wisdom and mystery, yet its most profound secrets, those left between the lines, remained hidden, just out of reach. Chapters 37 to 44 were not just empty, they were gone. Erased. Forgotten. The thought alone sends a shiver down the spine. What was so significant in those lost words? Were they too dangerous? Too revealing? Or simply too profound for the world at that time to bear? We may never know, but their absence speaks louder than any words left behind. Some say that those lost chapters held the key to the deepest mysteries of the first parable. They were not mere footnotes, not additional stories meant to flesh out the narrative. No, these were the chapters that tied the entire parable together, the chapters that held answers to questions we didn't even know to ask. Some believe they contained the shepherd's final confrontation, not with an external force, but with himself. A climactic reckoning where everything he learned, everything he fought for, would have come crashing down in a storm of revelation. But the pages are gone, the details lost, and with them, the chance to understand what happens when one faces their greatest fear. Others claim that these missing chapters were the most dangerous parts, filled with knowledge that no mortal was ever meant to carry. Wisdom too great, too pure, or perhaps too destructive for those who would have read it. It's said that the parable's original keeper, whoever that might have been, decided that such knowledge would destabilize the fragile order of the world. If the truth was known, if the shepherd's final step was revealed, perhaps the entire structure of life and death, of justice and wisdom, would fall apart. And so, the chapters were destroyed, never to be found again. But as we sit with this thought, a question lingers: could the missing chapters have been part of a greater design? The parable, in its incomplete form, has always been a reflection of the human condition, fractured, fragmented, and yet still filled with meaning. What if the missing chapters were a deliberate part of the story? A reminder that there are truths in life that we must search for on our own, truths that cannot be handed to us neatly, tied up in a bow. Perhaps the missing chapters were the very essence of our struggle, constantly searching for something, but never quite grasping it. And maybe that is the true lesson of the first parable, that no journey is ever complete, no story ever fully told. Yet, there are those who have spent lifetimes searching for the lost chapters. Some of them, driven by obsession, scouring every ancient library, every forgotten ruin. Others believe that the missing chapters exist still, hidden somewhere, waiting to be discovered. The thought of finding them has become an almost mythical pursuit, a quest that promises not just knowledge, but a power that could change the world forever. There are rumors of fragments, bits of text that might once have belonged to those very chapters. Some of these fragments have surfaced, scattered across distant lands, buried beneath layers of time and dust. When pieced together, they tell a disjointed, but tantalizing story, a story of the shepherd standing at the edge of an abyss, staring into a vast chasm of nothingness. The air around him crackled with energy, with the kind of force that only comes when the universe itself is about to break. It is said that in those moments, the shepherd saw something beyond himself, something vast and incomprehensible, something that made everything he had learned feel insignificant. The truth was both dazzling and terrifying. In these fragments, there are whispers of the shepherd's final test, a test not of his wisdom, not of his strength, but of his very soul. The missing chapters might have revealed the ultimate choice the shepherd had to make, to transcend, to evolve, to become something entirely different, or to remain as he was. It's the kind of decision that no mortal should ever have to face, yet the pages suggest that he did. But in the end, the choice was left unsaid, and the consequences, too, were left to the imagination. What remains, though, is the haunting realization that we may never know how it all ended. We can theorize, we can dream, but we can never truly know what those final chapters contained. They might have offered the answers we seek, or perhaps, they would have raised even more questions, questions too painful to answer. The world of the first parable is a world of endless searching, and the missing chapters are an eternal reminder that the answers, even when they seem within reach, are often just out of grasp. The disappearance of those pages has become a symbol for everything we cannot hold onto, those fleeting moments of clarity, those glimpses into the truth that disappear the moment we try to understand them. We live with the sense that something essential is always just beyond our reach, and the first parable, in its unfinished state, mirrors this experience perfectly. What we are left with, then, is the mystery, the haunting mystery, that makes the story resonate with such power. The missing chapters are not just a puzzle for scholars to solve, but a reflection of the very nature of life itself. We are all walking through our own incomplete stories, searching for meaning in the spaces between the words, trying to fill the gaps with what little we know. And perhaps that is the true beauty of it. The unknown, the incomplete, the mystery is what keeps us alive. It drives us forward, pushes us to continue searching, to keep questioning. And so, the missing chapters remain lost, but never truly gone. They are the ghosts that haunt the pages, the questions that echo in the empty spaces. They remind us that no story is ever truly finished. There is always something more to find, something waiting just beyond the next turn of the page. There is a moment in every great story when the hero stands at a threshold, looking out into the unknown. The world behind them is familiar, safe even, but the world ahead is a vast ocean of uncertainty. The air is thick with both fear and promise. It is in that instant that they know, this is the beginning. The path they are about to walk will shape them, mold them, and change them in ways they cannot yet comprehend. The shepherd of the first parable stood at such a threshold once. It wasn't just a crossing of land, but a crossing of spirit, a shift from one world into another. His journey mirrors the eternal cycles of mythology, the stories that have been told and retold across cultures and generations. These stories, so different in surface detail, carry the same heartbeat beneath, echoing the same truths about the human condition. In the first parable, the shepherd's quest starts much like that of countless heroes before him. He is called to leave behind his old life, to seek something greater. And as he steps into the unknown, he is met with trials, tests of character, of will, of heart. Each challenge pushes him further from the person he was, and closer to the person he must become. It is here that the familiar rhythm of the hero's journey begins to play out. The shepherd, like so many before him, faces the familiar pattern of death and rebirth. It is a journey of transformation. His world is torn apart, not by external forces alone, but by his own inner conflict. He is forced to confront his deepest fears and desires. His very sense of self is questioned and tested, not once, but over and over again. In those moments of vulnerability, the shepherd learns that true growth can only happen in the midst of uncertainty, in the space between what is known and what is yet to be discovered. The mythic cycle in which the shepherd participates is one as old as time itself. From the ancient legends of Gilgamesh to the modern retellings of heroes like Harry Potter, the arc is the same. The hero must first refuse the call, hesitate, doubt, and resist, before they can accept it fully. Only then can they be tested. The shepherd's first encounter with the trials of the parable is filled with fear, but also wonder. His initial steps are clumsy, unsure. But with each trial, he grows stronger, wiser. There are moments when his resolve falters, moments when it seems that the road ahead is too steep, too unforgiving. But in those moments, the shepherd learns that the path is not about avoiding failure, it is about accepting the inevitable falls, the missteps, and using them to rise higher than before. Like the great heroes of old, the shepherd must confront forces beyond his control. These forces are often external, but sometimes they are within, manifesting as doubt, despair, or anger. The cycle of mythology teaches us that it is in facing these inner demons, those voices of self-doubt and fear, that the hero finds their true power. The shepherd battles both the world around him and the world within him, and in doing so, he uncovers the greatest truth of all: the real enemy is not out there, but inside. And then, just as in every mythic tale, there is the moment of revelation. The shepherd reaches the peak of his journey, where he is faced with the ultimate challenge, no longer a challenge of strength, but of understanding. It is a test of wisdom, a test of heart. He must choose, and in that choice, his entire life, his entire purpose, is transformed. This is the moment where all the lessons he has learned, about courage, about compassion, about justice, collide. The hero is forever changed, not just in his outward circumstances, but in his very soul. The first parable weaves these timeless themes into a tapestry of ancient wisdom and mythic symbolism. Like the great cycles of mythology, the story moves through stages that resonate deeply with the human spirit. It speaks to something primal, something that lies within each of us, the call to leave behind the ordinary and seek something extraordinary. It reflects the struggles we all face in our own lives, the battles with doubt, with fear, with the world around us, and, ultimately, with ourselves. The shepherd, like all great heroes, steps into the unknown not because he is certain of success, but because he is willing to risk everything to find truth. The story echoes the themes of light and darkness, of life and death, that run through the veins of all mythic stories. The crossing of thresholds, the death of the old self, the birth of the new, all are present in the shepherd's path. In the end, the parable suggests, it is not the destination that matters most, but the transformation that occurs along the way. It is easy to see how the first parable mirrors these universal themes. As the shepherd moves through his trials, he represents something far greater than just one man's journey. He embodies every human who has ever struggled, who has ever longed for meaning, who has ever felt lost or broken. His path is our path, the path we all walk, in our own way, through the challenges and triumphs of our lives. Like the great heroes of mythology, the shepherd learns that there are no shortcuts to wisdom. There are no easy answers. The path is fraught with obstacles, and yet it is in those obstacles that true enlightenment lies. The first parable teaches that every test, every trial, is not just a challenge to be overcome, but a lesson to be learned. It is through struggle that we grow. It is through loss that we find the deepest parts of ourselves. The shepherd's journey is both personal and universal. In many ways, it is the story of every human soul, a story that spans time and culture. From the ancient myths to modern-day narratives, the cycle remains the same. The hero must face their fears, confront their inner demons, and ultimately transform. The first parable does not just reflect this pattern, it embodies it. It tells us that no matter who we are or where we come from, we are all part of the same mythic cycle. We are all heroes in our own stories, walking our own paths of transformation. In the end, the shepherd's story is not just his own, it is the story of us all. His path may be unique, but the struggles he faces, the choices he must make, and the truths he uncovers are the very things we all must face in our own lives. And perhaps, in this way, the first parable teaches us the most important lesson of all, that the mythic cycle is not just a pattern in stories, it is the pattern of life itself. There's a quiet moment in every reader's experience, a stillness that occurs right before the next page is turned, just before the eyes leap into the unknown. In that brief silence, a sense of possibility hangs in the air. It's as though, for a moment, time stops and the world outside fades away. All that remains is the connection between the reader and the story, a bond that has the power to reshape both. It's not unlike the first step of the shepherd. The moment when he, too, pauses before he leaps into the unknown, unsure of what awaits, but knowing with every fiber of his being that the path ahead will change him. That same energy, that same tension between what was and what could be, pulses through every reader as they immerse themselves in the parable. As the words unfold, they aren't just following a tale, they are participating in it. They are, in a very real sense, walking beside the shepherd. The beauty of the first parable lies not only in its ancient wisdom but in the way it echoes across time to the present day. The trials the shepherd faces are not just his, they are universal. And as each reader steps into his world, they too are confronted by the same questions, the same struggles, the same call to transformation. The moment the story reaches the heart, it becomes more than just an ancient myth, it becomes personal. The reader, unknowingly, begins their own journey of discovery. They see reflections of themselves in the trials and triumphs of the shepherd. His struggles with fear, doubt, and the need for purpose resonate deeply. In every decision he makes, the reader is prompted to consider their own choices. What would they do in his place? What would they risk? What would they discover about themselves? This process of identification is more than just empathy. It's a mirror to the protagonist's journey. As the shepherd faces his inner darkness, so too does the reader begin to reflect on their own fears. When he steps into the light of wisdom, so too does the reader find their own insights. It's as though the reader becomes a quiet witness to their own personal transformation, guided by the tale. The more they read, the more they understand the deeper truths embedded within themselves. But it is not an easy process. The road is not without its challenges. Like the shepherd, the reader too must be willing to let go of preconceived notions and old ways of thinking. The first parable demands engagement, demands a willingness to question, to confront the uncomfortable spaces within. It asks the reader to face their own versions of darkness and, perhaps most importantly, to confront the stories they've told themselves about who they are and who they could be. It's a journey that takes time, that unfolds slowly as the reader becomes more attuned to the symbols and themes that repeat, like the quiet echo of a drumbeat through the pages. There are moments of clarity, when the words hit home with such power that the reader feels they are no longer reading but living within the parable. And there are moments of confusion too, moments when the meaning seems just beyond reach, like a distant star on the horizon. But that, too, is part of the journey. Just as the shepherd must face trials that seem impossible, so too must the reader face the challenge of letting go of old expectations and allowing the meaning to reveal itself in its own time. The shepherd's journey, his evolution from uncertainty to enlightenment, is mirrored by the reader's own evolution. At first, there is a sense of hesitation, of holding back, unsure if the story is really for them, unsure if they are truly ready to face what the parable might stir up inside. But as the words unfold, there is a transformation. The same way the shepherd learns to trust the path, so too does the reader learn to trust the process of the story. The turning of each page becomes an act of surrender, a quiet acceptance that they are not just witnesses to the tale but active participants in it. It is a humbling realization. The parable is not just a story about another time and place, it is a story about the reader, too. And so, as the shepherd reaches his ultimate revelation, so too does the reader. The story comes to a close, but the questions linger. The answers, perhaps, are not so clear-cut, but they are no less powerful. They rest in the spaces between the words, and the subtle moments of realization that the reader experiences, moments when the heart races or when tears unexpectedly well up in the eyes. It's a quiet knowing that, though the book may close, the journey is not over. The reader, much like the shepherd, stands at the edge of something profound, something that promises to change them forever. This is where the power of the parable lies, not just in what is told, but in what remains unsaid. It asks the reader to confront the unresolved questions of their own life. What path are they walking? What is the true nature of their struggles? How are they transforming, day by day? The parable is a mirror, and the reader is invited to peer deeply into it, to reflect not just on the shepherd's story, but on their own. The answer is elusive, perhaps, and yet it is always there, hidden in the spaces between the words, waiting to be discovered. As the final pages are turned, a new sense of awareness lingers in the air. The reader has become a part of the mythic cycle. They have shared in the transformation of the shepherd, but now they must face their own. The questions, the doubts, the revelations, they are no longer just part of the tale. They belong to the reader now. And so, in that silence before the next book is opened, one last question hangs in the air. What is the next step? What path will you choose to walk now, with this new understanding? The invitation is there, just as it was for the shepherd. The story may be over, but the journey has only just begun.